I am honored to introduce Bob to the Summit Old Guard. Rather than provide biographical information on Bob, which he will do in entertaining fashion, I thought I would acknowledge some of the well-deserved recognition that he has received for his leadership in the Scottish American community over the past 30 years. From 1993 to 2002, Bob served as the chairman of the Ethnic Advisory Council for the state of New Jersey. He was later appointed by Governor Whitman to the New Jersey Advisory Committee on the Preservation and Use of Ellis Island in 1998. In 2000, the committee's work developed into Save Ellis Island Foundation, where Bob currently serves as director and secretary. In recognition of his years of service to the Scottish American community, he received the Ellis Island Medal of Honor in 2017. Bob has received an honorary doctorate from Edinburgh Napier University in Scotland, and he was also the recipient of the Saltire Award from St. Andrews University in Laurinburg, North Carolina. Last but certainly not least, Bob was recognized earlier this year with the National Tartan Day Award for his outstanding leadership in the Scottish American community. This prestigious award was conferred by the Scottish Coalition USA. Bob and his lovely wife, Suzanne, reside in Summit. And with that, I present Bob Currie, Commander of the Name and Arms of the Currie family.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you to the Old Guard for this very generous invitation, especially Paul Tukey and Joel Yukovitz, who helped make this happen. Al McRae, the song is The Road to the Isles, which wasn't tough to figure out because it was on the screen. Al still owes me money from years ago, so I'm glad to have this chance to speak to him directly and tell him to pay up. Yes, I like the fact that you guys begin with a story, because my family, the Curries or the Macvorics, were bards and storytellers. And it reminds me of the story of Henry Ford, when after his great success in the Ford Motor Company, he went back to County Cork, Ireland to research his roots. As he stepped into the town, a group of local businessmen greeted him excitedly and said, "Mr. Ford, welcome to Cork. It's lovely to have you back home. We're wondering if you might be interested in making a donation to the hospital we're having built." Now, Ford was accustomed to being touched this way, and he took out a checkbook and he immediately wrote a check for $5,000. The next day, in the local newspaper, in bold print across the headline, it said, "Ford donates $50,000 to construction of local hospital." And the businessmen came running back and said, "Mr. Ford, we don't know how this happened. It's a terrible mistake. It must have been a typographical error. And we'll arrange for a retraction to be printed in tomorrow's newspaper." And Ford thought about it and he said, "Wait a minute, I think I have a better idea." You know, Ford has a better idea. He says, "You grant me my one wish and I'll make up the balance of $45,000. And the gentleman said, "It's a deal." Ford writes another check out for $45,000. He says, "Now my wish is that when this hospital is built, I would like an inscription of my choice engraved over the front entrance to the hospital." And they said, "Well, of course, no problem, thank you." So the hospital was built. I have it on high authority that it's still there. And if you approach the front entrance, in bold letters across the door, it'll say, "I came unto you as a stranger, and you took me in." So I hope you take me in as well, but perhaps not quite in the same fashion. We are going to do a Q&A. If you're burning with a really hot question, please raise your hand. I don't have no problem with that. But Terry, I have you assigned a duty And this is the prize for the best question of the day. So there you go. Not for you, Al. I can't get it to you. So, okay. So,
Anything in there?
no, I'm a Scot. Come on. If you remember the old Rocky and Bullwinkle show, they had a character named Sherman and Mr. Peabody, and they had a Wayback Machine, so they could go back in time. And so I'm going to put you in a Wayback Machine now and take you back to 157 AD in Ireland, where began the race of Khan of the 100 Battles. Just about everybody with Irish ancestry claims pedigree back to him. And it was no different with the founder of our family, Muiredaig O'Daly, who was a famous bard. The O'Daly family was renowned for their bardic skills. And he was staying in Sligo at the hospitality of Donald O'Donnell, the king of Tyrconnell. And he kind of outstayed his welcome, which can happen at times. O'Daly was a bit of a rock star in his day. He was a very famous bard. Everybody knew him and everybody wanted him at their party. But this time, perhaps he stayed a bit too long. So O'Donnell sent a steward over to the house where O'Daly was staying and suggested that if you're going to stick around, maybe it's a good idea you pay some rent. And so O'Daly did what any rock star bard of the time would do, and basically he took out a broadaxe and lobbed his head off. And then with total pugnaciousness, wrote a poem about it. And he wrote, "Trifling was our quarrel with the man, a clown to be abusing me, and me to kill the churl. Dear God, is this the cause for enmity?" So sort of like in Brooklyn terms, so I killed the churl. I killed the jerk, big deal. Well, it didn't go over well, and the O'Donnells chased O'Daly all through Ireland, well documented at the time in a book called The Annals of the Four Masters. And after running out of places to hide in Ireland, he skipped over to Scotland and ultimately ended up the chief bard for the Lords of the Isles on the island of Islay. Islay, of course, most famous now for great whiskey. And so Muiredaig O'Daly became Muiredaig of Scotland. They loved him so much. And he begat an unbroken line of bards that comes down to, well, yours truly amongst a lot of other countries. 1493, the Lordship of the Isles was getting a little too big for their britches. They ran an independent sea kingdom throughout the west of Scotland. It made the English crown nervous. It made the Scottish crown nervous. So what do? You squash them. And in 1493, we see the fall of the Lordship of the Isles. And now the bards have nowhere to go until the MacDonalds of Clanronald invited them up to the island of South Uist in the Outer Hebrides. And there started an unbroken chain of MacVortic bards that lasted all the way up into 1726, which is pretty incredible. But the winds of change started earlier for the bards and their heritage. In 1609, a law was passed called the Statutes of Iona, and that basically decreed that Scottish Highland clan chiefs could no longer let their children study in Scotland or learn to speak Gaelic. So they were all sent down to England and started an English education. In 1636, Cowell MacVortic was reading the writing on the wall in terms of the future of this bardic race in Scotland. And he actually wrote about it. He said, "The heroes of the race of Conn are dead. how bitter to our hearts is the grief for them. We shall no longer live long after them. Perilous, we think, it is to be bereaved of the brotherhood, because the men of MacDonald have gone from us, and we poets cannot pursue our studies. It is time for the chief bard to depart after them, now that presents to poets will be abolished. And that was an omen of things to come. The last nail in the coffin happened in 1726 on April 16th with the Battle of Culloden, where the fall of the Gallic order took place. Gallic was essentially outlawed, and the MacVorics basically stopped their work. But it's interesting, you can't keep a good bard down. And just to give you an idea, here's two quotes about the power of bards. The first is from Diana Gabaldon, who wrote the very famous series of Outlander books. And she writes, "Now back in the day, if you were a Celtic chieftain bound for war, the first thing on your military checklist was get a good bard. Bards didn't just sing for their suppers at great houses or entertain at weddings and feasts. A bard's primary job was to rouse the warriors and give them heart. He encouraged them with stories of great victories of the past, riled them by recounting the atrocities of their enemies, and promised them immortality." That's what a good bard does. Alan Moore is a little more down to earth about it all. I love what he said about bards. And it goes like this. Now, as I understand, the bards were feared. They were respected, sure, but more than that, they were feared. If you were just some magician and you pissed off some witch, I mean, what's she gonna do? She's gonna put a curse on you. So what's gonna happen? Well, maybe your hens are gonna lay funny, or your milk's gonna go sour. Maybe one of your kids is gonna get a hair lip or something like that. No big deal. Now you piss off a bard and forget about putting a curse on you, he might put a satire on you. And if he was a skillful bard and he puts a satire on you, it destroys you in the eyes of your community. It shows you up as ridiculous, lame, pathetic, worthless in the eyes of your community, in the eyes of your family, in the eyes of your children, in the eyes of yourself. And if it's a particularly good bard, and he's written a particularly good satire, then 300 years after you're dead, people are still going to be laughing at what an ass you were. So the power of the bard, pretty substantial. Oddly enough, even though the tradition of training bards in Gaelic had died down in Scotland at this point, MacVoric or Currie bards just couldn't stop, and they became what is commonly known as vernacular bards. We might call them Hallmark card bards. Nice, I wouldn't, but just nice rhyming schemes. Without the language, the poetry started to go away. The history of this MacVoric race was pretty much wiped off the face of the earth. And it wouldn't be until the 1950s that Gaelic scholars rediscovered this MacVoric bardics family, and a whole flurry of scholarly research commenced out of nowhere. One of the big pieces was written by Dr. Ian Grimble, a leading Scottish historian, who described the MacVorics as one of the most ancient and distinguished in Scotland's history. Through the MacVorics, the literary torch in the Western Isles was preserved for generations. They were recognized as the most illustrious body of learned men who were specialists in the heroic literature and genealogy of the ancient Gaelic world. Pretty impressive. So, fast forwarding a little bit, in Glasgow in 1959, with this history that is now becoming uncovered, Colonel William McMurdo Currie, a self-styled Highland chief, formed the first Currie Society in Glasgow and rallied some 400 Scottish Curries to restore their place, their rightful place in Scotland's rich history. Now, at the same time, over in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, a kid was born. I like the Scotch Plains part. It's probably just a coincidence. But by 1982, I was just burning with interest to know where I came from and what Scotland was all about. So I made my first trip to Scotland 40 years ago this year, but I still did not have any idea how I was personally connected to Scotland. I saw great castles, I drank great whiskey, but I didn't find my peace in this timeline. So when my wife Suzanne and I were preparing for the arrival of our first daughter in 1988, I decided to kick up the research and get serious. And what's followed was an incredible series of events. You can call them coincidences, you can call them connections. I still don't know what to call it, but I started meeting with Colonel Currie in Glasgow, and he took me under his wing as his chosen one to keep this Currie family history going. So by 1992, as Terry mentioned a moment ago, I formed an International Currie Society and picked up on the work that Colonel Currie had begun. And in the process, by the way, I discovered that I descend back through Peter Currie on the island of Arran in Scotland. Peter was a sailor in the British Navy, and actually, for you Revolutionary War fanatics, he was a sailor at the Battle of the Virginia Capes, where Washington won at Yorktown. Ironically, on my maternal side, Colonel Nathan Fish was fighting alongside Alexander Hamilton at the same battle. So we had both sides going at each other. So here we have a Clan Currie Society. We've renewed this interest. And while most clans and families focus on the history and the genealogy of their specific family, with the creative, artistic roots of our family, we decided that wasn't enough. And so we created what is essentially an International Scottish Arts Foundation. We bestow scholarships, we produce special events, we create museum exhibitions, and in 1999, we created something called the Pipes of Christmas, but not yet. I'll get back to it in a minute. By 2014, we'd become so well established in Scotland and abroad that it was suggested that the Curries now consider electing a full chief of the family. And that is a process that we began in 14, and it's still ongoing. In 2017, the family held a convention in Glasgow to choose a commander of the name and arms. It was me. In 2018, the Lord Lion King of Arms, who has full authority over arms and clans and chiefs, reviewed our case and officially named me the commander of the name and arms of Currie. And that is, in fact, a road that continues to this day. But what it all says is that this once powerful and influential family that was lost to history has reemerged. And while we started, I think our best as an early society was about 400 members, through the wonders of social media, which we all know has its pitfalls, we have 5,500 members. So we're pretty proud about that. We're also proud that the heritage of the Bard continues. George Graham Currie was the mayor of West Palm Beach, Florida in the 1940s, but also the poet laureate of Florida. Robert Currie of Saskatchewan was made poet laureate in 2007. Just this year, Sheldon Currie of Nova Scotia was granted the Order of Canada, which is their Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest honor in Canada. And I actually found in my mother's papers a stack of poetry that my father had written back in the 1930s. So this urge to express oneself in verse, it just keeps pouring through. I have great debates over whether or not the proclivity for poetry can be genetic. And all the experts tell me I'm dead wrong. But I always say, let's look at the evidence. And the evidence is pretty stark. So that is how I ended up in this position of responsibility. And it's also how, through this learned kindred of Currie, I came up with the idea for something called, that's your cue, the Pipes of Christmas. Shameless plug, December 17th and 18th, 2022, Summit, New Jersey, Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church. Anyway, what's this all about? Well, in 1999, I was trying to raise some funds for the society, and I had this idea to put on a concert. One time, one and done, that would have Christmas music, would have readings from great Celtic authors, Robert Louis Stevenson, Sir Walter Scott, and Robert Burns, Dylan Thomas. And we thought, well, let's see what happens. By concert date, I had sold 200 tickets for a hall that could hold 600 people. And we were seriously in the red. I mean, really in the red. The day of the show comes, we open the doors, and well, 600 additional people showed up. I say that with a total straight face. I was there, I witnessed it. It's the miracle of the chairs. We filled the house, and more people came, and my ushers are like, well, what do we do? And one of them said, put them in the choir loft. So we started sticking them in the choir loft. And then more came. I said, well, pull the folding chairs out of the choir room. And by the time the last folding chair came out, the last person walked up to the door. And I don't know how that happened, but it did. And so we said, well, I guess we're going to do another. And so it became a production that grew year after year with more performers, more money spent on production, became better and better and better. And they all sold out. So getting restless again, which is something that I'm known for, I always wondered what would happen if we took the concert to New York City. I mean, Summit's great and all, but you know, when you make it there, you make it everywhere. And now, being this pretentious bardic type that understands he's got a hit show, I want to see what happens. Well, we brought it to New York City in 2006 to the Upper East Side, and we sold out. This time, 800 tickets. By the time we reached the end of the first act, we got a standing ovation. And that's like not commonplace in New York City, especially at the interval of a concert. So I beg the audience to stick around. We're not done. There's a second act to follow. And we've been at Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church since 2006. Still not being satisfied. We ran out of really good Christmas music. And I thought, all right, well, let's start writing our own. So we've been commissioning new works by Scottish and Irish composers really since about 2006, and we have a massive book of music that we have created and we have recorded. And it's just grown from strength to strength, and we're over the moon happy with it and enjoy bringing it to everyone who comes year after year, and hopefully to a number of you this Christmas as well. And that's my story. Yes, you may. How am I doing on time?
You're doing great.
Okay, super. So I talked a lot. And some of it wasn't quite as exciting as other parts, but I wanted to just open it up for questions and really get a dialogue going and see where we go. First hand up was over here, I believe.
Yeah, come on up.
You spoke about Gaelic, you mentioned Irish and Scots. How about the Welsh? How do they fit in, or do they fit in?
Are we talking football or are we talking culture? Yeah, the question was where does the Welsh culture fit in with Irish Gaelic and Scots Gaelic? Well, the Welsh have their own language. Anyone who's watched the last season of The Crown knows that young Prince Charles struggles with learning enough language to be coronated as a Prince of Wales. It's really considered it's part of the Celtic universe of lands in Europe, but it's virtually its own separate independent culture, language, etc. But a great question.
Online, you have a question from Al Aho?
There's a famous American logician by the name of Haskell Brooks Currie. He was born in Massachusetts in 1900, died at State College, Pennsylvania in 1982. He created, or was a very influential paper in logic, and the expression to currify a function is a testimonial to his name.
Yes.
He also had a programming language called Haskell named after him. It's different from perhaps Scottish. In fact, I know it's very different from Scottish, but do you happen to know whether he's related to your Currie clan?
Actually, I don't. It's a great question. We would probably need to do some hard genealogy on him. Currie in Scotland is like Smith. There's lots of curries in Scotland, and that doesn't include the Indian restaurants. But we, as a clan society, as a family society, we invite all curries regardless of origin. We have many non-curries that just self-identify as creative curry bardic people. But the core family, if we can trace them, are those that descend from the curries of the Western Islands and Highlands of Scotland that would have likely have born forth from our founder, Muirdac O'Daly in 1213.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I said hello earlier and explained that I spent 3 years in Aberdeen and a year in Edinburgh, which is very pleasant. So when I was in Aberdeen, they had the first of, it was the election that Thatcher got in, but they also had the devolution vote, separation of Scotland from Great Britain.
Yes.
During the EU election, Scotland voted to stay in.
Yes, they did.
And they also had a devolution vote recently, and they lost by a number of percentage points. So what's your view on Scotland becoming independent?
You really think I'm going to answer that?
Sure. And when you finish that, explain the Tartans.
Politics and religion, don't. It's the third rail of the subway. I am fascinated that enterprising Scots, brilliant Scots, some of the best educated in the world, feel this sense of self-identity. It's important to remember that Scotland was not a country that was taken over by the English. They joined by treaty in the 18th century. So it was never a notion of being overtaken by another country. This was a deal struck between the two countries. I think they would need to figure out a whole lot of things to get it done. But it's a country that's rich in talent. It's rich in educational institutions. It's rich in natural resources. When asked this question about voting for independence, I always say I will stand beside what Scotland decides to do. And there's no other way to describe it. I have no say in this game whatsoever, except to support the outcome and to make that outcome successful and to help Scotland thrive as best as possible. So that's actually a real answer. That's not a phony politician answer.
Tell them about the tartans. Colors.
How many official ones are there?
Thousands. The tartan I'm wearing is called the Currie tartan, appropriately so, based on the ancient Lord of the Isles tartan, and we have, of course, a long affinity with the Lords of the Isles. It's a good-looking tartan. It's very close to the tartan Prince Charles wears, because he also has, as one of his many titles, King Charles III. I didn't mean to do that. King Charles turned over, I believe, his title of Lord of the Isles to Prince William. So while King Charles was frequently photographed wearing Lord of the Isles, I believe now Prince William will be wearing it, and he ought to look pretty good. So.
Okay, Al McRae?
Al McRae, hi. How you doing, Al?
Good. I'll say a few words about tartans. Tartans are a recent activity, and most tartans were designed in the past 100 years or less, and after the dyes or made them bright, the original tartans have been lost, particularly during the Battle of Culloden. And the only way we know what the old tartans are is some paintings, and they found some kilts with the tartan on them in the buried in the ground in Culloden. So tartans are a new phenomena. Also, I'd like to point out there's a difference between the Scottish Highlands and the Lowlands. Most of you have probably been to Scotland, have devoted your time to Edinburgh and Glasgow. I encourage you to go up into the Highlands, which is very rural, and it's very picturesque. And as I've seen in background of my picture, there's the Illindunan Castle, which is one of the most photographed castles in Scotland, also prominent on Scottish whiskey advertising. So anyway, I encourage you to go to the Highlands. And by the way, I congratulate Bob for pronouncing Gaelic correctly. It's not Gaelic, that's what the Irish speak, but it's Scottish Gaelic. All my grandparents had Gaelic as their native language. My ancestors came over to North America from the clearances after the Battle of Culloden, where the English forced them off the land to grow sheep, and it's pretty grim. But that's a different story. Now, given enough time, I'll have my own lecture here. So I'm going to stop. And thank you very much, Paul, for having an opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you, Al. I knew we'd have fact checkers on everything I said. I didn't expect it to come from my friend Al, but he brings up a good point about tartan, and that is that I could do 6 hours on tartan and demystify it. Tartan is not what it looks like in Brigadoon. That never happened. It was not unusual for someone to wear multiple tartans because basically they were wearing hand-me-downs. The whole idea of tartans really became popular during the time of Victoria and Albert. And that's when tartan really went into full production, because she adopted Balmoral Castle and the Balmoral tartan. And then Sir Walter Scott started writing romantic novels about the Highlands, and everyone wanted to be Scottish. Still do, of course, but that's a great question and a great point, Al. Thank you.
John Baxter?
Say, speaking of the bagpipes were more or less banned after the Battle of Culloden, as was the wearing of the kilt. And it wasn't until the early 1800s, when England was a power over the world, that they needed troops. And so they went up into the Highlands, where these young men were living off the land, and they wanted those kind of people in the British Army. And so these Highlanders said, sure, but we want our own regiments. And so there's lots of regiments there which promoted the bagpipes, and a lot of the piping you hear now is a direct outgrowth of the high Scottish regiments. And Edinburgh in particular has a great college of piping. By the way, my best piper student visited us in Seattle 2 weeks ago and played my favorite tunes that he remembered. The first one being, of course, The Road to the Isles, which I was brought up on. You may have been brought up on Rockabye Baby or something like that. I was brought up on Road to the Isles. My mother would sit down at the piano and pound away and play Road to the Isles. And then when a piper would come to the house, she would play with the piper. And that was a joy to me. And after I learned how to play the pipes, that was a favorite tune, including the band that I was pipe major of. So anyway, that's it.
For now. Thank you, Al. I can get back to outlawing bagpipes later, because there's a spin on that, but please. Oh, sir.
Okay, where I grew up was the town of Harrison, Tartan.
Yes. Glasgow West, we called
Yes,
it.
that was the largest Scottish population in the nation at one time in the nation. They all came over to treadmills and all that kind of thing. Have they assimilated? Have they all moved out of the Carney and Harrison still? They were all a lot of first generation or second generation
Sure.
Irish and Scotch. I couldn't tell them apart, but and Currie had a very famous store in that area.
Yeah.
As you know, but anyway, I'm interested. When did the Scotch start coming? Did they come over with the potato famine like the Irish, or when did they start coming over?
It was really the Battle of Culloden, which Al mentioned a moment ago, that started clearing out the Highlands of the men and women who lived there. The English landlords preferred sheep on their land than tenants, because you didn't have to look after them and feed them, and they could make a lot of money off that. So there was a period called the Highland Clearances. A lot of people would tell you it was a terrible, terrible time, and in many ways it was, but not every landlord was as brutal as others. In my case, the Duke of Hamilton paid my ancestors passage to Canada in 1828. The other interesting thing about the clearances is it brought all of that incredible Scottish work ethic and intuitiveness and education, and it brought it here. And what Scots did is they assimilated and they became Americans. The Carney is kind of its own unique pocket. Scots are always referred to as the invisible immigrant, because we came here, we got down to work, we spoke the language, we didn't beat our chests and march in a St. Patrick's Day parade or any of that stuff. None of that kiss me, I'm Irish stuff, which is all fine. It's all fine. But that wasn't the Scots. They got down to work. They got down to making money. They were frugal as hell. And then you had people like an Andrew Carnegie, born a poor man in Scotland, come here. And not only did he and build an incredible body of wealth, but then he gave it all back and built libraries and institutions all over the United States. So, so the Scots really made incredible contributions to the United States, and Carney used to be Glasgow West, but sadly, that's pretty much faded away. You can still get a good haggis in Carney, though, I can assure you.
So, Bob, thank you so much for a wonderful talk. We had a great conversation the other day too, so I was all up for this. And I was doing a few things in the back there, so I'm not sure. You may have covered this, but this Pipes of Christmas has been a very big success, and it's been a lot of work, you know, to produce a big show like that and to do it every year in multiple locations in New York City. It's a lot of work. So he became an impresario accidentally, but it has brought so much joy and pleasure to so many people for so many years. I hope you feel it's all worth it. So Alec told me, when he and I were conversing this past week, that he came to your first two performances of Pipes of Christmas, and after that, he couldn't get to anymore because he didn't hear about it soon enough to buy tickets because it was selling out. Now, I've heard about it all these years, and I've never managed to hear about it early enough to buy tickets, so I'm going to come this year. And the reason I can come, maybe you said this, is that tickets go on sale on the 9th. What is today's date? So
Wow, that's fast.
Tomorrow, you can go to the pipesofchristmas.org website.
Pipesofchristmas.com will get you there.
Pipesofchristmas.com. You can go to their website and you can buy tickets. So it'll be quite an opportunity. And so having said all that, I just have one question for you. What did you think of the movie Braveheart?
Thank you and good night. Braveheart is a cultural phenomenon. Before Outlander, I mean, this was the rallying point. Historically, it's the worst piece of fiction you can possibly imagine. And where do you want to start? God, you know, the age difference between William Wallace and Longshanks' daughter-in-law were such that it was biologically impossible for them to have had an illegitimate child together. William Wallace never painted his face blue. That was done by the Picts hundreds and hundreds of years earlier, but it looked great on film. The Battle of Stirling was actually fought on a bridge, and Edward I's troops drowned, but that would have cost a lot of money to film, so they shot it on a field in Ireland. But what Braveheart is, and I think sometimes this falls away in some of the naysayers, is Braveheart is good storytelling. Whether or not it's historically accurate or not really doesn't matter. It's a piece of entertainment. So, yes, you should not look at it and say, this is what happened, because it's not. But there really was a William Wallace. There really was an Edward I. There really was a Robert the Bruce. There were many, many wars between the two countries. That history is well documented and absolutely took place. And watch it for what it is, not because you're watching a documentary. And it's funny, in that clip from the Pipes of Christmas, there are two young men standing on the left of the camera clapping. And those are two actors from Braveheart. Young William Wallace and young Hamish, who are both very good friends of mine and come every year to perform in the Pipes of Christmas. Brian Cox, who is in Braveheart, has also come out to see our concert in New York. And I just finished working on a project with the Irish actor Brendan Gleeson, who played Old Hamish in Braveheart. So it's a great film. It speaks to the attitudes of people at the time, but it's not good history.
Thank you for a great presentation. I have been to Edinburgh a few times. Recommend it to this group. It's just a thoroughly lovely city. Thanks very much for a great presentation. I've been to Edinburgh a few times. I might say it's a thoroughly lovely city. I'd recommend it to everybody in this room. Quickly, when I was in Edinburgh, they had a military parade called the Military Tattoo. And can you tell me, some of the history of that? And then also, I guess the Scots are known as the Black Guard or something like that, or Black Watch or something. Watch. Can you talk about the history of those names? Thank you.
Boy, I may need you here, Al. Tattoo is actually derived from an old Dutch word, which was called tap-toe. And that was a signal a drummer would play in the pubs to remind them that the troops needed to go back, they needed to stop drinking, and the taps were to be turned off. So it's a horrible word. It's a terrible word. The Edinburgh Tattoo, or now the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo, is an incredible event every August. It takes place in the esplanade of Edinburgh Castle, and it's an absolutely fantastic selection of international military bands, all the best pipe bands from Scotland, and then now it's expanded to bring in all sorts of diverse international performers and ethnic performers. It's an incredible event. I recommend it, and they do a great job, and they raise a lot of money for charity. Black Watch. The notion of the Black Watch was that they basically took all of the colors of all the tartans that were allegedly restricted, although there was a lot of tartan worn in Scotland after Culloden, and it all just mushed down into these dark, muted colors of primarily black and green, which are known as the Black Watch. It's a tartan that anybody is entitled to wear, as are all tartans except the Balmoral tartan, which is reserved exclusively for the royal family. But in fact, in 2011, I didn't get to a whole lot of stuff, but we created a tartan for the public called the Ellis Island tartan. And the idea of that tartan was you didn't have to be Scottish to wear it. It was the American immigrant tartan. So rather than put on somebody else's family colors, here's a tartan that was made for everybody in the United States. And it's been very successful. We're very proud of it. And it's quite an experience designing a tartan and getting it registered and blessed and put into production. So quite an exciting experience.
As many of you are probably aware, thank you. Our local high school, the Highlanders.
Governor Livingston.
Governor Livingston, absolutely. All right, a little hope. The Governor Livingston Highlanders. And we have the tartan plaid as our color. Our fight song is Scotland Brave.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't stand up when you played it. As an alumni, I should have stood up.
It's been noted.
Yes. And we had the Highland dancers, and maybe we had bagpipe. In fact, when I was there, we had an all-girl bagpipe band.
Right.
So anyway, that's local color there. My question is, as we get into this era of our lives, we're looking into ancestry. How the heck have you managed to keep the ancestry for so many centuries ago? And how, if people are doing ancestry now, what are some of the best ways to look at that? Thank you.
There's two parts to that. When I started my interest in my family history, I knew nothing. And this was before the internet. This was before Ancestry.com. My father had already died. He was an only child. He was born in 1909. My mother was gone, and neither of them had brothers or sisters. And all of my grandparents were dead. So I had nothing, except a family plot in Westfield that had my father's mother and father and one of my great uncles. And that was it. Dad told me as a young man that my great grandfather was a journalist from Edinburgh. That was about as wrong can be. The slog was going really slow. I hired a professional genealogist, old school, and presented my findings, and they said, save your money. You can't do it. You don't have enough to go on. So I'm really sorry, but we don't have the ability to do it. So then I got notice of a box, my father's papers, and inside that box was something of a poor man's will from my grandfather to my father, talking about settling some old debts upon his death. And one of them was from a Currie in Vanguard, Saskatchewan. So I thought, all right, let's find out where that is. And it's in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's way out. It's gateway to Moose Jaw, if that helps you. And it's a little prairie town. And it turns out that my great uncle homesteaded the town in 1905. And so I wrote to the mayor, and the mayor said, yeah, Donald Currie was a great hero here. I'll bet if you write to his daughter, you can find out more. And she lives in Grimsby, Ontario. So I wrote to cousin Bertha, who's in her 90s in Grimsby, Ontario. Actually, I phoned her because I thought, don't wait for the mail. Let's get this going. And she said, my God. She goes, I haven't heard from your side of the family since 1947. And she started filling in all the pieces. And dominoes started falling. And then a package came in the mail from Vancouver from a gentleman who said, I hear you're poking around the family tree. If you really want to know, you should really read your great-great-great-grandfather's autobiography. Again, the writing thing again. And he said, I just happen to have a Xerox copy. Here you go. So now I'm suddenly thrown all the way back to Scotland in the 19th century after a professional genealogist said, save your money. And I've put all the pieces together. I've worshiped in the church where my ancestors worshiped and where my great-greats were married in 1828. I've walked the streets that my ancestors walked. I've done all the research on the family in Canada. My great-great-grandfather was a journalist in Montreal, not in Edinburgh. So there's some truth to that. And it's like there was a little divine help with this, because honest to God, it should not have happened. But I shouldn't be here right now at all, frankly. But all these things led me to this, what I call my road to the Isles. Was there a part two to that? I think I got really caught up in that one. Oh, genealogy. Ancestry is great, but it's not the final word. It's a great place to get started. But there's a lot more records out there to be found, but they're generally expensive to find. There's a great program called Scotland's People that will help you. You buy credits with them, and then they will, in fact, do some of the heavy lifting for you. The genealogy societies are very helpful. Your Scottish or Irish and clan and family societies, very helpful. And the Scots are, in my opinion, the nicest people in the world. And they're very keen to welcome you and its family, whether you are or not. So it's always a very warm welcome there, and it's a very wonderful place to be. And I hope that answered the question okay, to your satisfaction.
One of our members is a Welsh Druid.
It's not his fault.
Hey.
Is it you?
No,
Okay.
I wish it were. But I'm only 1/4 Scottish and half Welsh.
Okay.
At any rate, he's a Druid. Now, is that similar to an Irish Scottish bard?
Well, Druids were actually, they're like Bronze Age people. They go further back into the depths of time, the Druids. They were the people that built Stonehenge.
Yeah.
So it's an earlier chapter in the great history of the European continent.
Well, maybe we'll have him as a speaker. His name, for those who don't know, It's Arturo, a fine old Scottish
Of
name.
course.
Arturo Roberts. And he is a druid, which is a title given to the people who excel at the arts. And as the Irish and I think of the Scots more of industry than art, but
Hey, tell that to Robert
You're
Burns.
bards.
Tell that to Robert Burns and Sir Walter Scott,
Yes.
and we'll have that discussion over a glass of whiskey sometime. Thing is, well, your point is right, and what you're driving home is that there's really nothing the Scots can't do. I think that's really what you wanted to say. I'm really amazed that the subject of Scotch whiskey has not come up, and the topic of golf has not come up, and the topic of Sean Connery hasn't come up. And by the way, I thank you, because that's usually what I get pummeled with. So this is a very educated, elite crowd, and it's very evident from your questions. Please.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with the Scott.
Okay, bear with me for a second, Bob. I believe that Doug has a question, and let's make that the last question since we're approaching 11:30, but I'm tempted, since you talked about the fact checkers, that you claimed Dylan Thomas, and yet I always thought of him as a Welsh poet.
Yes, he is.
Oh, okay, I thought you had swept him in with your other Scotch friends.
To Celtic.
Ah, Celtic,
authors,
got
yes.
it. Very good.
Gotcha. Are we doing one more question?
Doug.
Doug, please.
Could you give us just a few words on the origin and the composition of the haggis? And also, you might have a few words on St. Andrews and Gulf. That's it. Thank you.
Sure. Well, where haggis is concerned, obviously, Scots are the great gourmets of Europe. That's of no surprise to anyone. But really, the Scots were thrifty, and the Scots didn't throw anything away. So, you got a sheep's stomach, you got some organ meats, there ought to be something you can do with it. And so they created their national dish, which is a concoction of sheep innards and or sometimes venison, sometimes vegetarian now, and spices and oatmeal, all stuffed inside a sheep's stomach and boiled until we all say yes. I happen to like haggis very much. There are better haggises than others. I think the plural is haggai, I'm not sure. It's a great dish. It's frowned upon. If you were served it and you were being told it was pate, you wouldn't think twice. You just gobble it up. But for some reason, that haggis just gets right in the way. It's a wonderful dish. St. Andrews and golf. I'm going to demystify golf in Scotland for a minute too. I hope Al is not a golfer, or we're never going to get done. Al, stick with me.
He's on mute, it doesn't matter.
Oh, is it? Yeah, keep him that way. No. I am a very bad golfer. I play on a pass-fail basis, and I have played across a number of courses in Scotland. And my advice is the pilgrimage to St. Andrews is almost required. What people don't always know is that there's more than one course at St. Andrews. There's the Old Course, there's the Jubilee Course, and another one I can't think of at the moment. So the Old Course actually is not the most challenging course, but it's the most famous because of something called the Swilcan Bridge, and Bobby Jones, and the Claret Jug, and everyone should see it and experience it. But I would tell you, my favorite golf courses in Scotland are off the beaten path. There's no clubhouse, there's no starter, there's just an honesty box. And you walk up, you have no tee time, you drop your 2 pounds in the honesty box, and you play through. And these courses are scenic, they're beautiful, there's lots of gorse, if you want to have gorse, and I think they're just sublime. And they're not crowded with American tourists all the time. The other great thing I discovered just quickly on golf in Scotland, which I think this country really should adopt, and I may write a letter to the USGA, is that Scottish golfers bring their dogs with them. And in my attitude, I played in a lot of foursomes, but if I could choose anyone to play golf with, I'd play with my dog. And it's not just because he always finds my ball, which is out in the bushes somewhere, but because he doesn't talk back, he doesn't give advice, he always thinks I did a great job. And so I love being on a course in Scotland where golfers are out with their dogs. To me, that's just fantastic. So do go, do play the courses, do drink the whiskey, do, for those of you who are investors, look at Scotland as a business opportunity. Great economy there with new cutting edge technology, great universities. It really has something for everyone. It's a magnificent little country of 5 million people, and I'm very proud to be part of it. What? Alan, step forward.
Really?
Yeah.
One last question.
No.
What's your favorite whiskey? And by the way, in Scotland, they call it whiskey, not Scotch.
We call it mother's milk. I'm inclined to the smoky range, and my everyday Scotch, without over-endorsing one or the other, which might get me in trouble, but my everyday go-to dram is Talisker. Just enough smoke. If it's a cold winter night and I have a cigar and there's a fire in the fireplace, I might be leaning towards Lagavulin or Laphroaig, but to me, Talisker is right on the spot.
Those are very distinctive.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. So anyway, it's whatever you like. I mean, your palate chooses what your favorite Scotch is.
Okay. Bob, thank you so much for a wonderful and highly personal presentation today. I think we are all very much in your debt. Now, be aware of that. And now, Terry Barr.
So Bob, I have the pleasure of presenting to you a certificate of appreciation from the old guard. We have our own history that dates back to 1930. The orchid commemorates the fact that the Summit area was the leading producer and distributor of orchids back in 1930. But what I'd really like to do is ask for an old guard salute.
Oh. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.